Jamin, thank you so much for joining me again. Throughout this series, we've looked at a lot of different things. We've looked at Saul and how he succeeded initially and then how he failed. We looked at David and his early successes and then also his sins. Last time we looked at Solomon and his wisdom. Despite the fact that he was the wisest man, he made a number of very crucial, foolish mistakes. As we looked at last time in Proverbs 16 and verse 25, there is a way that seems right to a man, but his end is the way of destruction. When we fail to follow after the wisdom of God, it's only going to end in bad things. Every single time, if we abandon the wisdom of God, there's nothing else for us to lean upon. Solomon, unfortunately, at a certain point in his life, abandoned the wisdom of God to a degree. We see in 1 Kings 3, where this first started. And beginning in verse 1, now Solomon made a treaty with Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and married Pharaoh's daughter. Then he brought her to the city of David until he had finished building his own house and the house of the Lord and the wall all around Jerusalem. So God had specifically prohibited marrying outside of the nation of Israel and making alliances in this way of making these political marriage alliances, because he knew where that would end. And he offered those warnings to the people of Israel. It's not like he just told them, don't do this without explanation. He knew the potential it had for leading these people away from God. And we see that's exactly what happened with Solomon, because he didn't stop after he married Pharaoh's daughter. He exponentially compounded this issue with additional marriages. And we see that in chapter 11. In verse 1, but King Solomon loved many foreign women, as well as the daughter of Pharaoh, women of the Moabites, Ammonites, Edomites, Sidonites, and Hittites, from the nations of whom the Lord had said to the children of Israel, you shall not intermarry with them, nor they with you. Surely they will turn away your hearts after their gods. Solomon clung to these in love, and he had 700 wives, princesses, and 300 concubines, and his wives turned away his heart. For it was so, when Solomon was old, that his wives turned his heart after other gods, and his heart was not loyal to the Lord his God, as was the heart of his father David. For Solomon went after Ashtaroth, the goddess of the Sidonites, and after Milcom, the abomination of the Ammonites. Solomon did evil in the sight of the Lord, and did not fulfill the Lord as did his father David. Then Solomon built a high place for Chemosh, the abomination of Moab, on the hill that is east of Jerusalem, and for Molech, the abomination of the people of Ammon. And he did likewise for all his foreign wives, who burned incense and sacrificed to their gods. This was contrary to God's wisdom. Solomon abandoned that. He gave in to the influence of these foreign wives and created abominable acts and ways for them to worship, and ways that led the people down a path they should never go.
Yes, and so here we see a very clear contrast between the wisdom of men and the wisdom of God. Thousands of years before this, and thousands of years after, it was the wisdom of men to create treaties through kings marrying off their daughters, or the rulers marrying off their daughters, to create a familiar bond and almost a physical treaty of peace amongst nations. So amongst men, this was the wise decision. It was the wise decision to marry Pharaoh's daughter and create that peace with Egypt. However, we see that this is in complete contrast to the wisdom of God, because what God was most worried about, or most concerned about, was the hearts of his people. And we see that the hearts of his people, they followed what Solomon did. What Solomon did was follow the hearts of his wives, and those wives followed the hearts of false gods.
It's really a very sad story, right? Because Solomon had this great gift given to him, wisdom from God, more than anybody who had ever lived and would ever live again. And yet, despite all of it, he gave it up. because his heart was turned away from God and turned after the ways of his wives. It's really a very strong lesson for us today that we need to be diligent and extremely careful about who we're selecting to be influences in our lives, because the same thing can happen to us. Our hearts can be turned away. We can give into foolishness. We can turn away from the wisdom of God if we're not careful. We know in 1 Peter 5:8, the devil is a roaring lion seeking whom he may devour. Those who are devoured are often those who become complacent. They drift away. They fail to continue to grow as they should. James 1 and verse 22 says that we need to be doers of the word and not hearers only, deceiving yourselves. For if anyone is a hearer of the word and not a doer, he is like a man observing his natural face in a mirror. For he observes himself, goes away, and immediately forgets what kind of man he was. But he who looks into the perfect law of liberty and continues in it, and is not a forgetful hearer, but a doer of the work, this one will be blessed in what he does. This is a promise from God that if we continue to look into his word, to seek after his wisdom and follow it, truly, honestly follow it, that we're going to be blessed. We will achieve the goal, which is heaven. We'll achieve the goal of following after him. If we're not, if we are forgetful, if we look into the word, if we look into God's revealed wisdom and forget about it, and just move on with our lives and do what's right in our own eyes, that end is going to be destruction. Solomon told us that through Proverbs. And we need to be extremely careful what path we're on.
So it's so sad that someone who had the right idea, who came to the right conclusion, as we see in Ecclesiastes, we discussed in our previous videos, came to the wrong conclusion, and it seems to be in the very end. We also talked about David and how his sin had consequences for others. Well, no other example beyond this do we see where it has such a major impact of consequences on others. Because after this moment, the brightest point in history for the Israel nation, we see a strong decline. The Israel nation is never whole again. And as we've talked about before, the first half, the northern half, the Israel, they're never worshiping God again as a nation. And Judah doesn't do much better. And so the choices that Solomon makes, the foolishness of Solomon, creates a consequence for many, many people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's really a very strong, sharp decline, like you said. The people never recover from this, right? Solomon's out there building all these places for his wives to worship, and he goes and joins them. And as the spiritual leader of the nation, the people follow his ways and they sacrifice as well. We see when the kingdom divides, the northern kingdom of Israel worships idols throughout their entire history. They never turn back to God. They continue to commit sin after sin, idolatrous situation after continued idolatry, until they're eventually destroyed completely by the Assyrians. The southern kingdom of Judah will follow after idols, and then there will be a little bit of a recovery, and they'll follow after idols, and there'll be a little bit of recovery. And you see some kings try to pull people back, but they're never completely successful. There's always a little remnant of idolatry that remains, and then the next king comes along and just rebounds right back into it. And eventually they're carried away by the Babylonians, where finally they get the message. And then after the 70 years of exile, they come back and they continue to serve God at that point. It's centuries of people falling away after idols because Solomon didn't guard his heart well, gave in to his love of these women, and allowed the people to be deceived and follow after his ways of idolatry.
So piggyback off of that point, we look for application to our own lives and learn from his foolishness. Although he sinned with gathering so many foreign wives, the consequence of that is they wanted to worship their false gods. Mm-hmm. And even still, he could have made the choice to not allow that in his home.
Right.
And what we see from the scriptures very clearly is he allowed it in his home. And so from that point, that's where he sets up the altars, and that's where he changes the hearts of the nation. So for application for us, what are we letting in our home?
Yeah.
While the initial thing may be innocent, may be not non-problematic, question is it wise? Is it going to help me follow God's word, God's will, God's way? Or is it going to lead me astray? So as Christians, and as you and I are men of our households, what are we letting
Yeah.
in our household that will get in the way of reaching that ultimate goal?
Yeah. There's a passage in 1 Corinthians 5 where this is written to the church in Corinth, because they have a man who's living in a sinful relationship, and the Christians in that church are just tolerating it. In fact, they're proud that they're tolerating it. Such a horrible situation in this case. And Paul writes here that this is really, it's a mark of shame, not a point to brag about, right? And so he tells them in verse 5 to deliver such a one to Satan for the destruction of the flesh, that his spirit may be saved in the day of the Lord Jesus. Your glorying is not good. Do not you not know that a little leaven leavens the whole lump? Therefore, purge out the old leaven, that you may be a new lump, since you truly are unleavened. For indeed Christ our Passover was sacrificed for us. Therefore, let us keep the feast, not with old leaven, nor with the leaven of malice and wickedness, but with the unleavened bread of sincerity and truth. Leaven here, which we know is yeast, right? You put yeast inside some flour, and it spreads exponentially, and then it grows and really rises and creates that nice fluffy bread that we like to eat. In this case, it's an analogy for sin and the spreading nature of sin. And in this case, it's in the church, but it can be the same thing in our home. Are we rooting out, to your point, that sin in our own lives, in our homes? Are we seeking to follow after God? Are we being sure that when we're worshiping together, we're really doing our best to remove that sin and not allowing it to spread? Do not be unequally yoked. Be careful the influences in your life, right? Evil companions are corrupting influences at times, to paraphrase the verse. It's really, really important that we be sure that we're bringing in people who we can influence, and they will not negatively influence us. We need to be very humble also to recognize you may never think, oh, that person's going to negatively influence me or impact my life in a negative way. They can, if we're not being mindful and watchful and continue to look in the wisdom of God to root out that leaven out of our own lives.
Absolutely. So then we talk about conventional wisdom of man today. Conventional wisdom of man today would suggest, let everybody just be their own person. And that would be the conventional wisdom.
Yeah.
But if we follow God's wisdom, taking this full circle, in the church, that is where things can sneak in very easily. And just like in this church in chapter 5, where there was one individual who was very obviously sinning, and that person was not dealt with, it could very easily have caused a major issue, and it could have had serious ramifications. Just like Solomon having one issue in his own household, and then it spilled out into the nation of Israel, had major ramifications for many, many people.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, so if we look at Solomon, one of the wisest men in the world, and or the wisest man in the world, gifted by God, what happens at the end? Is he a good king? Is he a bad king? We talked about in this series how all three of these kings had good traits and bad traits. And even though he is the wisest man, he has all the wealth in the world, he's set up for success by God, by his father. He has no reason to fail. And yet, there's question in our minds. We're not told. Because all we are told is in 1 Kings chapter 11, verse 41 through 43. Now the rest of the acts of Solomon, all that he did, and his wisdom, are they not written in the book of the acts of Solomon, and that the period that Solomon reigned in Jerusalem over all Israel was 40 years. Then Solomon rested with his fathers and was buried in the city of David and his father. And Rehoboam his son reigned in his place. So in the very end, what we do know is Solomon turned away from God. We're told that. We don't know if he ever came back. We don't know if he ever took his own wisdom and applied it to his life at the end.
Yeah. I come back as you're reading that, and I think back about the end of Ecclesiastes, and we talked about this last time. Ecclesiastes 12 and 13. Let us hear the conclusion of the whole matter. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is man's all. For God will bring every work into judgment, including every secret thing, whether good or evil. What Solomon did at the end of his life, we're not told. We're told about how, as he got older, his heart turned away and he followed after. Whether he repented of that, we're not told. Thankfully, we're each only responsible for ourselves, right? I can follow and look at Solomon and try to emulate some of the good things he did and steer clear of some of those things that he did that were sinful. At the end, verse 14, God will bring every work into judgment, including every secret thing, whether good or evil. There's lots of things about all these individuals that we've talked about, Saul, David, and Solomon, that we're not told, right? This is not a complete, exhaustive history of these three men. They may have done many more. Saul, we've talked a little bit about this. Saul, there's not a lot recorded that Saul did really, really well. There may be other things that he did that were great successes in those initial 2 years of his reign. We're not told anything about that, right? We're told a lot about what he didn't do very well. David is the opposite of that. We're told about a lot of things that he did good. We're told about some cases where he didn't do things very well. Solomon, we're told about some things, a little bit more mixed bag, right? God's going to bring all of us into judgment as individuals, whether we are doing good things or bad things. And all the things, right? All the good things that Saul did that we don't know about, all the bad things that David did that we don't know about, all the good things and the bad things I do, all the good things and bad things you do, as individuals, we're all going to be judged. Are we fearing God and keeping his commandments as our top priority? Is that the most important thing in our life? For David, I think it's very clear that it was. Even when he lost focus at times, he came back and tried to focus again. Solomon, we're not told. It was initially. Maybe at the end, maybe not, don't know. For me, that's all I can really control. Am I keeping God first focused in my life? Or am I drifting away? If so, I need to pay attention to that and focus myself back. Solomon's foolishness should be a very clear warning for any of us, that if we are not keeping the fear of God and the obedience to his commandments as our all, these are the ramifications that could happen. All right, Jamin. Well, thank you so much for studying these topics with me. I really appreciate it. I know I've gotten a lot out of it. I hope you have too.
Absolutely.
We'll leave it here for today. Thank you so much.
Thank you for taking the time to watch this video. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow us on Facebook for more content like this.